Shalom Lashem, Erev Tov. Tonight I wanted to do what I do every time I come back from Israel. It's become already a minhag around here. I wanted to walk you through. I had 36 hours in Israel. Of them, whatever hours were sleeping, whatever hours were at the Haraperet at the Shiva house, whatever hours I spent to get on and off of Harabait, and the rest of it that I had, that I was not meeting people, I managed to run into a few bookstores. And I wanted to share with you. So how can I go to Israel without that? I wanted to share with you a little bit of what came back with me, and to introduce you or to reintroduce you to some of the HaShamayim that either we've spoken about before, or that we should be speaking about more. I'm thinking of where to start. Let's start. Let's start somewhere problematic. Why not? Good. I brought back a book that came with me from Yerushalayim. Now, I actually have a copy of this book, but I brought this copy for somebody who needed it. And then by the time I got back to the States, they already found one. So now I have two copies. It's a good book to have two copies of. There was a very special Chacham. His name was Rabbi Moshe Chagiz. Rabbi Moshe Chagiz was born, I took notes, don't worry, I'm not remembering everything by heart. Was born in Yerushalayim of 1671. So under the Ottoman Empire. And he passed away in Beirut in 1750. So he was about 79 years old. And according to some traditions, he was buried in Tzfat. According to some, meaning not according to everybody. He was a very, very unique Chacham. Rabbi Moshe Chagiz was born to his father, Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz. He was also the grandson, if I'm not mistaken, of Rabbi Moshe Galante, who was the Rishon LeZion later in life of the time. His father passed away. Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz had a very special yeshiva. It's a yeshiva that I have not yet heard enough people speak about. But it was a yeshiva I've mentioned to you before that had secular studies in it. It had vocational studies in it. And it also had high rabbinic studies. So depending on what the rabbis of the yeshiva felt you could accomplish or what they felt was best in tune for you, everybody studied Torah. But other parts of the day were dedicated to other studies. I'm talking to you about the early 1600s. So long before Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch dreams up Torah with Derech Eretz, long before Rabbi Soloveitchik, Yeshiva University, long before any of the people who are thinking about let's be novel and merge Torah with Yeshiva studies, I'm not talking to you obviously about Old Spain and Andalusia and the Chachamim that were there. I'm talking about a modern format of how a yeshiva operates, the things that people studied. This yeshiva, after Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz passed away, I told Rabbi Moshe was a very young boy. I don't know how old exactly, a young boy. So his grandfather inherited the yeshiva, Rabbi Moshe Galante. And the dream of the child of Rabbi Moshe Chagiz was that he would grow up and continue the yeshiva in his father's footsteps. And he realized that the number one thing you need to run a yeshiva is money. So when he came of age, he took it upon himself to start traveling the world and to collect money for the yeshiva from other places outside of Israel. The main communities that the Chagiz family were connected to were the communities of Italy and to the Jews of the Spanish-Portuguese background in Amsterdam and other places. Egypt also was a place that he was connected to. And he began to travel in order to secure funding. And the traveling was good because he actually made it to Egypt and was able to get a whole donor base together, which didn't used to exist before in his father's generation. In the interim, a few things happened. The first thing that happened was that Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz, that Rabbi Moshe Galante becomes the chief rabbi of Israel. At that point, the chief rabbi of Israel is essentially the chief rabbi of the whole Ottoman Empire. His hands became very full very quickly with yeshiva. Add this to the fact that Rabbi Moshe Chagiz had a very hard time staying out of trouble. What do I mean staying out of trouble? Rabbi Moshe, the son, he had a very hard time staying out of trouble. What kind of trouble? Political trouble. He hated the Shabtaim, the Sabbatheans, the people who believed in Shabtai Tzvi as the false Mashiach. He decided everywhere he went to wage war against them. Here's the problem, is that when you start to wage war against a powerful group of people like the Shabtaim, they have very powerful ways to take revenge on you. First move, slander you to the point that your donors no longer want to donate to you. And that was the first step. Almost immediately, the yeshiva suffered a terrible blow because they got the communities of Egypt and of Italy to stop funding the Rabbi Moshe Chagiz. It didn't help. It didn't help that Rabbi Moshe Chagiz identified certain very prominent rabbis in the Spanish-Portuguese community as Shabtaim. The most famous of them was a famous rabbi by the name of Chayun. His last name was Chayun. There also was a rabbi, the chief rabbi of London, Rabbi Ayilon. They were famous Chachamim that were famously followers of Shabtai Tzvi. And when he called them out, he was the middle of the storm. He makes some unusual allies. One of the allies he makes friends with is a man by the name of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Ya'abetz, who was fighting a war against not just Rabbi Yonatan Halevy, but primarily against a man by the name of Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato, the Ramchal. And Rabbi Moshe Chagiz joins forces to fight a war against the Ramchal also. Now, Ramchal is Italian. The other rabbis he attacked are Spanish-Portuguese. Very quickly, his popularity drops. Later on in history, Rabbi Moshe Chagiz will be famous for being the fearless warrior who fought against the Shabtaim when everybody else was too quiet. But in his lifetime, I don't know that he ever recognized that. Later in his life, maybe 50 years after he leaves Israel, he comes back to Israel in order to die. That's essentially where when they say he died in Beirut, I'm not exactly sure if that was on the way to Israel, on the way out of Israel. I'm not clear exactly about his death. But what I can tell you was a very courageous person. Whether you agree with all of his wars against different Chachamim or not, some believe that those rabbis were not actually Shabtaim, that they were just caught in the crossfires of various wars that were happening then. This particular book, Sefat Emet and Ele Mas'eh, are two books that are written about the importance of Eretz Yisrael in Jewish literature. And a lot of it is an encouragement of Jews outside of Israel to make their way back to Eretz Yisrael, and that this is a whole book is focused on that. Aside from that, he wrote many, many other works. I have a few of them in my home. I have a book of his Mishnat Chachamim, which was written on, not Pirkei Avot per se, but on the 48 ways to acquire Torah in Pirkei Avot. It's a book like this thick, published by Feldheim, of all places. And Feldheim doesn't publish it anymore. So it was published once by Feldheim, and I managed to track it down through a library of a rabbi who died, and I managed to get it from his estate. But this rabbi, Hashem should bless him, he clearly was very paranoid that people would steal his books. So he stamped his book here, and here, and here, and here, in about every 10 pages throughout the whole book. So in the middle of it, like a stamp with his name on it, his mamash, the whole book, like everything. You can read it, you just have to look around the stamp, because it's sometimes even twice on one page. Yeah, Hebrew and English. He was an American rabbi. So I have a copy of the book, and there are some pages, I'm not exaggerating, 4 or 5 stamps on the same page. Exactly like that, but it's like, why did you do that? You ruined your own book. But that must be either that, or I'm judging him favorably. Maybe one of his grandkids got into his drawer and stamped the whole book. But this was the only copy of the book I've managed to find, and I have a copy of that, Baruch Hashem. And it's a matter. I also have his book Shever Posh'im, which is a war against those rabbis of the Spanish-Portuguese community. That book was not republished to the best of my knowledge. I got a facsimile copy where they copied the original, and I have it. It's in my house. And he didn't mince words. Like, he wasn't politically correct about it. If you believed in Shabtai Tzvi, he was going to destroy your life. And that's exactly what he tried to do. And in that case, that brings me to the exact opposite place. You were going to ask him? Is this already the period where a lot of transgressions? Yeah, for sure. It doesn't help that in his family, there were Chachamim that went over to the dark side. And so it hit very close to home for him. Yes. It hit very close to home. Yeah. Only in Hebrew. Yes. Don't worry. We'll get there. Your Hebrew will get there. Because if we wait to translate, no. That brings me to the next 2 books that I brought, which I'm going to regret later sharing on camera. But I've been wanting these books for a long time. I'm sure that you know, as you've been with me for a long time, that much of what we find in Judaism today, the problems that exist, not all of them, you can't blame everybody for everything, much of them come from Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi created a revolution in the way that Jews think, especially in the realm of Kabbalah, And unfortunately, those people who justified his behavior created a whole philosophy behind it of how you can justify someone's sins. So listen, until now, we have this understanding. A person does avirot. In order to fix their avirot, they have to do teshuvah. Are there avirot that you cannot do teshuvah from? Probably, or at least they're very difficult, or they require a lot of regaining of trust. Stepping on your husband's glasses is not the same thing as going with another spouse, right? There's a different levels of avirot. I once heard a rabbi say, "Oh, somebody got molested. So what? People forget to say Ala Michya all the time." Some of you have heard this rabbi before. You have his books in your house. And what is the answer to that? It's not true. Not all avirot are equal to each other. How could you even say such a thing? But yeah, exactly. And so the same is true with tissue. So until this point in history, if you found out that someone did avirot, so what did you do? They have to do teshuvah. Sometimes they don't want this person as their rabbi anymore. Sometimes they don't. But in the realm of Shabtai Tzvi, here's something crazy. There's going to be someone who's going to do avirot. We're all going to be aware that he does avirot. Not only are we going to be okay with the fact he does avirot, but we're going to make holy the avirot that he does. Yeah, so we're going to say that his avirot are actually mitzvot. How could it be? Crazy things. And so for me, it was very important to always identify where did this philosophy come from? How did it come from? Where did it get to it? There are some famous researchers in the realm of Shabtai Tzvi. The first, the famous is Professor Gershom Scholem. He was the one who spent a tremendous amount of time researching Shabtai Tzvi. And also another Chacham by the name of Professor Meir Benayahu. You heard of him? Meir Benayahu is the brother of Rabbi Yitzchak Nisim, the Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. Why they have two last names, I have no clue. I'm not so into the family to know those details. But he spent a tremendous amount of time in his life researching Shabtai Tzvi and the history of the Kabbalah that came from there. There was a book that was published by Gershom Scholem, which collects letters of the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi, Rabbi Yonatan of Aza. And those books were over the years, those letters were collected, and then they're not easy books to find. And I managed to get myself a copy of these books. Now, this book was doing great. It was pretty clean on the cover. Until one day I went to the bookstore and I asked her, how much does it cost? She said, well, here's the price tag. I said, okay. So I paid the book. She's like, let me take the price tag off. I said, no, it's fine. I'm okay. Said, no, let me take it off for you. And she pulled off the price tag and ripped the cover of the book. And then I said, well, that's hard. Do you have another copy? No, that's the only copy we have. I said, well, can you give me a discount? Nope. Why not? You ripped the cover of the book. If you want the book, you're going to pay the full price. So I paid the full price. But these are letters they're copied from an edition of Professor Gershom Sholem's collection of letters. But that wasn't the most exciting part. There's a bookstore in Israel called Holzer's Books. It's run by a man by the name of Lior Holzer. And he decided to reprint a book on Kabbalah called Sefer HaBiriyah, the book of creation, written by Natan of Aza, the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi. Anyone know Shabtai Tzvi's prophet's full name, Natan of Aza? Avraham Natan ben Elisha Chaim Halevy. He was born in Yerushalayim in 1644, and he dies in Sofia. Sofia? Where? Bulgaria. Very good. It's capital of Bulgaria. I mean, we're Halevi, so for sure they're Leviim, but my Leviim are from Yemen, so they didn't leave, they didn't come, they stayed in Yemen. I want to take some credit for some Halevi, like that Levi, but this Halevi I'm happy to be out of. And this book, Sefer HaBiriyah, is an entire book written by the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi. And the one scary part you're going to have to reckon with is, it was printed only by this bookstore, Holzer Books. And so I went to go get it myself, little bookstore. Make sure to get myself a copy of it. You realize very quickly, I mean, you have to look at the footnotes on these kind of things. How many sources? The guy was not a slacker. He was a serious Talmid Chacham. How do you go from being serious Talmid Chacham to being the prophet of Shabtai Tzvi? Only if you realize the Torah is a double-edged sword. You can use the Torah to justify anything, and you can use the Torah to keep yourself straight and narrow. But they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Interpretation is in the eye of the beholder also.
Today, that goes to the troops. And quote the Arizal statement the Arizal would not even kill lice, mosquitoes, insects in terms of
They're trying to use it to get soldiers to stop killing our enemies. Yeah, listen, we all. Why don't we go far? Let's say that Rizal didn't kill mosquitoes. So what? I mean, so what? Therefore, nothing. That's not a halakha. That's not what we learn from. It's not a way we live our life. Unfortunately, we are very misguided people in general, and we always have ways to shoot ourselves in the foot. You rarely find other nations that have the talent that we have in that regard. Uh, and I'll say one step further, which is those who are at war right now are acting very cruelly in order to have compassion on us. This is something that wars are not beautiful. No one ever told us that wars are pretty. There's no such concept that in war nobody dies. That's how wars work. In wars people die. In war, we prefer that we don't die. That's the hope. I mean, the hope is that we don't die. Now, who won the Revolutionary War? I'm sure the British have a different version of that story than Americans do. We still celebrate 4th of July. Imagine if somebody were to hand out Tomer Dvoraz to us. So what do you mean? Yeah, British who killed to make this country. It could be. But in the history of the perspective that we come from, we were oppressed and we suffered. Don't put this in the UK class. We were oppressed and we suffered terrible things at the hands of the British. And Baruch Hashem, we were able to get our freedom from them. And that's, of course, on the other side of the pond, the story is going to be very different. But that's the way that all wars work. And so I think that one is enough. There's a chacham. Yeah. Yeah. Kabbalah. From like everything to do with some sometime in the 1600s, exact year. I don't know to tell you. I didn't get a chance even to crack it open. Yeah.
Are there Jews that hold out Kabbalah or
Of course.
even if it conflicts?
Of course. I don't think they care. This was written in 1670. Oh yeah. So, where should we jump next? If we're talking about Kabbalah, I think it's something special. I have a copy of this book already, but this book was given to me. I didn't buy it in a bookstore. It was given to me by a dear friend of mine. It was even inscribed. Rabbi Dr. Idan Peretz learned with me in yeshiva. He's not related to Harav Peretz. He learned with me by Harav Peretz. He lives today in Efrat. He is one of the most humble, honest, good people that I had the chance to learn with. At the time, I remember when he was going through his PhD studies and the Semicha studies, he was working as a shochet, like he was living in the yeshiva, doing all kinds of little jobs to make sure he could afford living. And over the years, we've stayed in touch about different things, small things. We're not so heavily in touch, but always remember, those people, you remember them only for good in your life. And when he heard that I was coming to Israel to visit Harav Peretz, so he waited to visit Harav Peretz with me. I came to Harav Peretz's house, finding him waiting outside. He didn't even go inside yet. He wanted to go with me. And we went there together. We spent the evening there together, maybe 3 hours together. And we got to talk and different things. A few years ago, he published a Siddur. He comes from Catalonia. That's where he was born. And so he speaks Catalonian, mamash Catalonian. And he grew up speaking Catalonian. And aside from Spanish and Hebrew that he speaks now and all that, and English. So he decided to publish a number of years ago a Siddur Catalonia. This is the Siddur, the Nosach that the Chachamim of Catalonia prayed. And if I could show you, he actually signs his name, Idan ben Avraham Peretz Barceloni, who was from Barcelona. That's how he signs his name. And in here, the Haskama that you're going to find is from Harav Peretz. And Harav Peretz in his Haskama says that you should know that even though he's published a Siddur according to the Minhag of Catalonia, by the way, it's a very beautifully done Siddur. And he uses even special fonts, and he adds in all the halachot that were written by different rabbis from Catalonia. In the introduction, Peretz writes that the introduction is a book in and of itself. And the truth is that Rabbi Yidan really spent time analyzing manuscripts and different libraries. He even has here like copies of the original Sidurim that he used for his research. And he's working on more books of this genre, but this is something that is very special. I have a copy. When he published it, I bought myself a copy right away. Whenever my friends publish a book, I want them to know I'm proud he published a book. But to get one from him that was signed by him in Israel, that was, yeah, it's so this is a book. And what's interesting here is that obviously the Chachamim of Catalonia, unlike the Chachamim of Andalusia, were very inclined to Kabbalah. We're talking much earlier in history, but this is from that camp with the Catalonians. The Catalonians have a tradition, and this is their tradition that he published here. Yes. It doesn't have a Spanish version, but I believe that he wrote articles in Spanish about it because I remember finding that. You know, maybe you could pass it around. I can show you. I just want you to see the name of Hashem in this book. It's that's how they wrote it in Catalonia. That's how he published it. Something you want to see. You see a little. I don't know the significance of it, but you see his name. You see the yod yod and a little.
Yeah, there.
Yes.
It's all there.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the significance is, but Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh de Modena is one of my favorite chachamim. I've spoken to you about him. I'll tell you, Rachel, the other week I was reading in the afternoon some pieces of his biography to my wife. He wrote an autobiography, which is very unusual to find a chacham who writes a book about himself, called Chaye Yehuda. I'll read to you from it in just a moment. Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh de Modena was born in 1571 in Venice and died 76 years later in Venice in 1648. He was famous for being a very eloquent speaker, writer, author. He was very talented, so much so that when he would speak in his Bet Knesset in Italy, even non-Jewish royalty, princes, ministers from the church would come hear him because they claimed you never heard someone speak so eloquently. He was an unbelievable speaker. He wrote a commentary that is in every single En Yaakov. So any Agadah in the Talmud has his commentary on it. It's called Haboneh, the commentary of Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh de Modena. He's not actually from Modena. His family is from Modena. That's why he calls himself from there. Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh de Modena most famously is known that he was born to a family of Mekubalim. His father was a Mekubal. His grandfather was a Mekubal. Some of his rabbis were Mekubalim. And at a certain... Yeah, tell me the story. How do you remember that? Right, I don't remember. When his mother was dying, he remembers this very vividly, is the moment he switched from being a Mekubal to a non-Mekubal. When his mother was dying, his family were all practicing to meditate on different names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to pray with different kavanot. And we said while they were all busy praying, he was the only one holding the bucket for his mother as she was coughing up blood. He said he viewed it as a negative thing, like everyone's so busy praying, but no one's doing what actually needs to be done. And ever since then, something switched in him. And you can see that the war against Kabbalah in him, as logical as it is also very emotional. There's a lot of emotion attached to it. And especially since he comes from that place where he was once there and he's not there anymore, he wrote some of the most monumental works against Kabbalah. His most famous work is the book called Ari Nohem, The Roaring Lion. That book got responses to it from the Ramchal. He wrote 3 books against that book. I have only the third one. The third one was written by a student of the Ramchal, as what the Ramchal told them. But the first 2 from the Ramchal, I don't even know where to find them. I've been looking for them for years. But there are 3 responses from Ramchal. Also, Rabbi Eliyahu ben Amozeg wrote back a response to that book, among other Chachamim, but those 2 are Chachamim whose names you know. Rabbi Aryeh de Modena was a very colorful personality. In his autobiography, he's very honest about his life. He had a tragic life. He writes in his book that every year he remembers his birthday as the day that he regrets he was born. And his life, if there was not a person in the world who could suffer more than he could suffer, and if there was one kind of suffering, then he would always go through it because HaKadosh Baruch Hu seems to want to create him to always be suffering. He even says that he was born, coming out of his mother, he was breached and he came out with his bottom first, and he said that was his mazal for his whole life, that always that's the direction that his life went, and he was very bitter. He lost his most precious son. He had one son he was very close to, and he died, and his son was murdered. He had everything that could go wrong in his life went wrong. in addition to all of this, even though he came from wealth and he made his money, he lost all of his money because of something he's very honest about in his book. He had an addiction to gambling. He was addicted to it. He could not stay away from gambling. As much as he tried, there were periods in his life where he stayed away and then he fell back into depression and went back to gambling. And he writes very clearly about his struggles with his addiction. And that his son, one of them, had the same problem. And that he was it's something very rare to find among Chachamim. And you should know that, unfortunately, certain people obviously see that and say, how do you learn any Torah from him? He was an addict. Do you know how many other Chachamim we have that had problems and they just didn't tell you, so we think they're great? But here he was being honest. He was cried his eyes out about this and how he suffered because of it. And when I read his books and I say, imagine if I was with Daniel Winnick in the car in Yerushalayim. We're going up the hills to Yerushalayim. I was telling him about Budaria de Modena. I said, can you imagine if the young people knew that when they struggle, there are great rabbis who struggled also. You're not alone. Don't think you're the first person to struggle in Jewish history. Sometimes we feel like we're all alone. And the worst part of struggling is to struggle and think you're alone. That's the worst part. He had one more struggle, and that was marriage. He was engaged to be married. If you want, his autobiography has been translated into English. I was going to bring it, but I thought it was in my car, but it must be at home. I must have taken it out. It's called The Life of Yehuda. It's a pink book. You can find it on Amazon, right? Yehuda Aryeh de Modena. And you'll find it's an incredible book. It's translated, and even when I read the Hebrew version, I use the English one for all the footnotes because the Hebrew edition doesn't have the research done on it like the English one does. I want to read you up one part of that. He was engaged to be married. He was young. He was very happy. It was the love of his life. He loved her, and he is very open about how much he loved her. And he writes here, oh, I lost the page. Yes, in English. He wrote it. He wrote the book about his life. I just found it when we were waiting for the class to start. It is on Amazon. Here. Mamash had it, bro. Here. והגיע תור הנישואים. When the time for his wedding date came, היה י"ג סיוון. It was the 13th of Sivan. He wrote to his father to come. ויקרא לאוהביי וקרוביי. I called all my relatives and my loved ones and my friends. ונלך תכף אחר השבועות. כולנו שמחים וטובי לב. So we were all very happy we're getting married after Shavuot. לוונציה, we traveled to Venice. והגיענו שם. When we got there, מצאנו הכלה במיטה. We found that the bride was sick in bed. והכל אומרים, אין רע, כי מעט שלשול ורפואה תהיה לה. Nothing is not a big deal. She has a little bit of diarrhea. She'll get better soon. ומיום עד יום גבר עליה חולי. And from day to day, her sickness got worse. עד כי נטתה למות. Until she was almost dying. ובליבה כלב האריה ולא נבהלה. And her heart was like the heart of a lion, and she wasn't scared of dying. Notice the heart of a lion, that's his name. Yeah, I mean, in her heart was also him. ויום מותה קרא לי. And on the day that she died, she called me. She called him, and he came to her. ותחבק ותנשק לי. And she hugged and kissed me. ותאמר, and she told me, ידעתי כי זה עזות מצח. I know that what I'm doing is highly inappropriate. It's very brazen. You're not married yet to hug and kiss a man. אמנם, but האלוהים יודע, that God knows, כי שנה אחת של שידוכין לא נגענו זה את זה. The whole year that we were dating, we didn't touch each other once. אפילו באצבע קטנה, even with our small finger. ועתה בפרק המיטה רשות מוות נתון לי. And she said, but now when I'm standing before death, death allows me to do things that I was not allowed to do in life. Lo zachiti liot ishtecha. I did not merit to become your wife. Ma eseh v'kach nigzar b'marom yaseh Adonai retzono. What can I do? That must be what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has decreed, and the will of God will always be fulfilled. Uviksha shikru lechacham, and she called to ask for the chacham to come, lidvadot, so she could confess, do vidui with him. V'yavo, and he came, v'amra vidui, and she said her vidui. V'shala birkat horeha, and she asked for the blessing of her parents. V'imi, and she asked for the blessing of my mother. Uvaleh Shabbat Kodesh, Kav Aleph Sivan, and on the 21st of Sivan, which was the Shabbat, Kimat Leil Shemet Bo Achi, was almost the same day that his brother died. Yatsa HaKala B'achnasat Kala, Mechei Rik L'chayei Ad V'niftara L'olama. Said she went from, he's playing on words here, she went from one world to the next world. ויגדל הבכי מבית ומחוץ לכל ידע ומכירה ותהי מנוחת הכבוד. And he said, and the whole world was crying, inside the house, outside of the house, and she rested in peace. And that's the same words that he engraved on her tombstone. Those words. When I heard this, I only got more respect for Bidal Yadem Modem. And he did an Avirah, there's an Avirah here. He hugged a woman that he was not married to. They were ready to get married. And it's a very human moment. It's a moment of they wanted to be married to each other. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was taking her away from him. And if somebody wanted to make a movie, they can make a movie. Because they end up marrying him off to somebody else right after this. It's not good for a man to be single. They marry him off. She has a severe mental illness and spends the rest of her life making his life bitter and miserable. And so not only do his sons die, not only does one son get murdered, not only is he struggling with addiction, not only is he losing his own money, not only is he, the world is fighting him. There's a war against Kabbalah, his mother dies. Everything happens. On top of all of that, he marries somebody who, mamash, until the day they die, suffers from her. It's not enough to lose one love, it's to never find another one. And he writes, he's very honest about his feelings here. I don't know if his wife ever read the book. I don't know when it was, I'm not sure. I don't know exactly how this happened. But I can tell you that when these kind of books get buried under the carpet, it means that our next generation will never know to feel real human emotions and to know that it's okay. It's okay to share those things. Because if a rabbi were to write those things in a book today, I am afraid of what would happen. So this tiny little book that I got it's not even like on the list of books that he wrote. It's a tiny little book of Musar, like little daily advice to learn from him. And it's even printed in a small little book. I saw it by accident. Min Shamaya. By accident I saw it. I said, wow, it's a small book, maybe it can go in my carry-on. And then I saw it. This is not even in the list of his books. So when you go online to read the books that he wrote, it's not even there. And so I feel like it was a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I got this book. I'm just worried about the time. Let's see where else I could take you before we. Okay, you know Rabbi David Halevy and how much I love Rabbi David Halevy. This set of his books, Mayim Chaim, has been out of print pretty much since he died. I have one volume of his book. It's the second volume, but I don't have the first volume. And for years I've been looking for it. I cannot find it in auctions. I cannot find it used. I cannot find it anywhere. And so on the way back home to my in-laws' house, I was looking for Legos for my kids. I didn't end up buying anything there. But if you think Legos are expensive in the U.S., so right next to the Lego store was a used bookstore. It's actually a very interesting book. It's called Rebook. Rebook means you can buy a book. Let's say you buy the book for 20 shekels. If you come back with the book, you get back your 20 shekels towards another book. So it's like some kind of business model of recycling books, some kind of book exchange. I don't actually know how it works. Maybe you get back only 10 shekels from that. I don't know exactly how the situation works, but I'm going to the books, and you should know. What kind of books go in the recycling book place? The books that nobody wants to keep in their house. It's usually the books, old chumashim, broken sidurim. I was looking, so there's nothing here, but it's the only bookstore open now, so let me look. And I'm around one shelf, and I see Chaim Chaim of Rabbi David Halevy. And I didn't want to wait. I just took it off the shelf. I didn't look anywhere else. I took it on the shelf. I walked straight to the cash register. I said, how much does the book cost? And he said, 25 shekels. It's like $5. I'm like, please, I'll take 2 if you have. But I took this book and I ran for the mountains. I'm so grateful because I have volume 2, but I don't have volume 1. So Bezrat Hashem, we will learn some more things from Rabbi David Halevy. What? What about the Lego store? I'm glad you got the point of that story. So,
what is this particular set?
It's a random teshuvot in halakha. So different questions he would ask, very similar to Aser Harav. No, it's not inscribed. I have some of his books inscribed, but this one is just no, it was inscribed. Somebody whited something out. For all you know, that's him. You know what I have to do? No, don't tell me. It might. It's him. Hold on. Stop. Can I borrow someone's phone? Can I borrow your phone? I don't need a flat. No. You want me to do that way? That's his name. That's Chaim David Halevy. He inscribed the book. To who? Mordechai, maybe? Dr. Oh no, Lemechubadi, Dr. Avraham Matlut, Mem Tet Lamed Vav Taf? No. Bivracha Vehokara. ברכה והוקרה זה פרחה, זה פרחה החשובה למען לשוננו. Must be a professor of language. Chaim David Halevi. And Avraham Matlut. That's what it looks like to me. Which tells me that the guy in the recycling store who whited it out probably was like, nobody's going to buy a book with an inscription. Don't come. I didn't even notice that.
So maybe it was
I have one other book signed. You can see from the other side.
the descendants of Dr.
Yeah.
Maybe the descendants of Dr. Abraham.
Maybe you could like make it.
Of that. Oh, that could be also. And it's over there is where you find it. Harav Kapach, you know how many times he found manuscripts because they reused old books to do binding. So he found them like in the spine of a book. He finds a fragment from the Rambam or something. Rambam's handwriting. Like who bound their Siddur with the Rambam's manuscript? But that's how Harav Kapach finds many books like that. Wow. Okay, you find it. Okay, you saw it on a camera. You guys saw it first. Let's see. Okay, the other ones we can do together quick. This book of Rabbi Chalfon Moshe HaKohen. I've told you about him before. He has an interesting name, so you can't really forget that name. Some argue that he was Rabbi Moshe Chalfon. Some say Chalfon Moshe. His name was really Moshe, but his mother called him Chalfon, which for those of you who are Israeli, you know a little bit of the Gashashim, you probably remember Chalfon. There you go. That's his mother called him as her like pet name. She called him Chalfon, so much so that he kept it as his name. And he put his name Chalfon before the name Moshe, so that nobody would think it was his last name, because his last name was HaKohen, and he didn't want to lose the HaKohen status. Now, what's so special about being a Kohen in Jerba? Everybody there's Kohanim. Like, literally everybody's last name is Kohen. So I guess he was special because he was HaKohen. I can relate to that. All my grandfather's brothers were Levi, and my grandfather was Halevi, and so that's special. How did that happen? I always tell people we paid extra for the Hey Hayidiyah. We always got the extra Hey because we deserved it. I don't know what we did for it. But Rabbi Chalfon Moshe HaKohen was born in 1874 in Jerba. Jerba is an island. Very good. Belongs to Tunisia. He died in 1950. Be'erech, he was 75 years old. In 2005, Rabbi Shalom Messas brings his bones to Israel. He died before he was able to make it to Israel. He spent his entire life. It was a very fascinating chacham. I could tell you days about Rabbi Chalfon Moshe HaKohen. I'll tell you when I last spoke to you about him. Was when we were studying Sephardic Zionism in the writings of Chacham Faur. He wrote a whole bunch of essays on what a modern state of Israel should look like, according to Sephardic law, what Mashiach should look like, what all these things should look like. He was the first chacham in Jerba to get involved with the Zionist movement officially. So interestingly, even though he was against the Alliance, so he was against the more secular waves of education that came to Jerba, he believed in a very traditional Torah study system. Harav Mazuz, who also comes from Jerba, he once said that somebody who learns Mada before they learn Torah, he is Nechshav Kemet. Mada, Torah, Mem, Tav. He says someone who learns science before they learn Torah, they're dead because they first learn science. But somebody who learns first Torah and then they learn science and they're at Tam, they're walking with the Kadosh Baruch Hu in innocence. It's important to learn secular studies, but it's okay to have a strong foundation first in Torah. And that was the opinion of the rabbis of Jerba, that was the correct way. You could study and a very long plan of study. It doesn't end at a certain point, but you work your way into other sciences out of the Torah and not necessarily alongside or before. It's their approach. Rabbi Chalfon Moshe Kohen was very involved in starting the first Zionist newspaper in Jerba. When the state of Israel was established, he was responsible for making it a Yom Tov in Jerba. He made rules. You read the Torah, you read Haftarah, you take out, I think Haftarah he instituted, you don't take out, you don't say Tachanunim, you wear Yom Tov clothes, all the schools are closed, you make Seudah the night and the day. Like he was very involved in that. Interestingly, that he gets zero recognition by the Zionist movement as being a leader of Zionist thought. A few ideas that he had, that he wrote about obsessively, and you find out they later happened in history, again, with no credit given. His dream was that the world would not unite under one government. He thought that would be a disaster. All the communist ideas of the time of let's become one country, let's all rule it. He thought it was horrible because at the end of the day, every country has its own style and its own flavor and its own ideologies. But he believed that there has to be two organizations. There must be a committee of nations that all sit together and communicate with each other. There must be one central place where all the nations of the world communicate. They dialogue with each other. Think United Nations. And in fact, he called it something similar. And then he said, but on top of that, it doesn't help to just have dialogue. There must be a Supreme Court of the world that can enforce when one country commits crimes against another one that are outside of the jurisdiction of a country. He believed very much. He wrote numerous articles about this. And both of those things, he would obviously... Listen, he was a primitive Sephardic rabbi who lived in an island off the coast of Tunisia. Like, that's all the credit he's going to get in his life. But he wrote some tremendous things. Even he saw in the fact that we made Aliyah using airplanes, fulfillments of biblical prophecies. He was very interested in technology and things like that. Another thing that he felt was very important was he believed that once there would be a state of Israel, that in order to promote Aliyah and recognition of the state of Israel among the population of Jews outside of Israel, that any state of Israel which would be established would have to pay money to fly young people to visit Israel at least once in their life. You heard about that one? That started in 2000, the Taglit birthright movement. This whole idea, he believed that it was crucial, that it should be a government-funded program. Because how do you expect young people to make Aliyah if they've never seen the country that you're trying to get them to move to? And the best thing would be if the government can fund a program to bring Jews from outside of Israel, from every galut, to see Israel, not to move to Israel, to see Israel, to spend time there, and then to go back and make that decision on their own. Which was, again, you can also see him as a visionary for things that he didn't even merit to see. Lastly, and I want to show you a little bit of his rabbinic vision and his plan. When the Nazis came to Jerba, the Nazis in North Africa behaved a little differently than they did in Eastern Europe. It's not they didn't kill people, it's not they didn't hate people. They had a whole different plan for Africa and for the Middle East than other people maybe had for Europe. About the... Okay, very good. So
They shipped off some of the men and the Nazis were repositioned back to Stalin.
right. From what I read today, and I don't have a hardcore proof for it, but from people that were there said that they saw it, that when the Nazis demanded a certain amount of money to stop the deportation of Jews from Jerba, they wanted some 50 gold coins or whatever that was. It was Shabbat. And he said, fine, I'm coming with you. He got in the Nazi car and went from house to house to house of Jews on Shabbat. In Jerba, he got out of the car, went to the house, collected money from them on Shabbat, put it back in the Nazi car, went to the next house, till he collected enough money to get the Nazis off of their back on Shabbat. Of course, but that's the type of leader that he was. He was very proactive in his leadership and wasn't afraid of anybody or anything. I think this is the kind of chacham that we should spend more time getting to know. The last, he lived. He passed away in 1950.
It's not different. It's actual life, how they gain knowledge and kedusha in the struggle of life rather than This person was perfect.
You should know there are some stories like that about some of these chachamim. Whenever you hear me speak, even if I'm going to speak to you about a Hasidic rabbi, I will never tell you miracle stories. I find the miracle stories to be very off-putting, either because I don't believe them to be true, or if they could be true, I believe them to be of no value. Because what am I supposed to learn from that? He could turn water into.
It's really good. Like,
But that's very important to show their engagement. There are stories of the Baal Shem Tov, which show leadership on a very communal level, on a social level. My wife once spoke about the social reforms that were led by the Hasidic rabbis. I'd rather hear that than hear about how some lady couldn't have a baby and he put some holy water on her forehead and then boom, 9 months later she had a baby. What does that story help me?
stories of Solomons are very.
And chaval, because there are stories of the Baba Sali that are not like that. Yeah, and I'm not from the world of the Baba Sali. I'm simply sharing that there's a choice. There's a choice to ignore the ideas we can learn from Chachamim. And I'll tell you that part of that has to do with hoping that nobody will ever become that. Because if I can tell you that when they were 2 years old, they already knew the whole Torah by heart, then you don't have a chance. So you might as well not try. And it's part of keeping people down. It's a certain system. Okay, let me show you the last batch of books I'll show you tonight. Maybe another time we'll have time for everything else. I know, right? That's something special. You have to like books, right? To appreciate that. There's a special chacham in Morocco. His name was Rabbi Rafael Berdugo. But I went this time to the Yemenite bookstore twice. And twice, they were closed. But it's the same one that I told you about last time. You can never find it open. You could never. And I saw him open. But I needed to buy a book across the street. So I'm going across the street 5 seconds. 3 minutes I was in the store. It was Ariel Mitch. I went out there. I came back in. It was closed. How did you open and close in the time that I went? That's how it happens. So I went to the Sephardic bookstore. They have a whole Yemenite section. Nothing new. There was nothing new that I don't have, so I didn't come back with anything from that side of the world. Another time, B'ezrat Hashem. Rabbi Rafael Berdugo, known as Hamalach Rafael, the angel Rafael. He was a very famous Chacham in Morocco. Born in 1747. He died in 1822 at the age of 75. He was born and died in Meknes in Morocco. The words about him there's not enough. There's not enough time to tell you all the things we know about Rabbi Rafael Berdugo. They call him an angel for a reason. He was called, if you say Hamalach Rafael in Morocco, it only means one person. That's him. Not that I know of. I can't tell you not that I know of. But he was a tremendous Avbedin. His father, his grandfather, great grandfather. He was a very famous lineage. In fact, Professor Moshe Amar, who you and I have learned from in the past, he shared here one of the Berdugo family trees of all the Chachamim and different people that come from that dynasty. Right? It's a tremendous amount of people that are very special to Talmidei Chachamim. I'm sure that Rabbi Berdugo in Florida is related in some direction. I'm certain. It's not even a question. Rabbi Rafael Berdugo, likely they're all from the same family tree. Rabbi Rafael Berdugo wrote a number of books, and I've been collecting them over the years. They were last reprinted by Rabbi Shalom Messas. He started in Morocco and ended in Israel. In fact, this book, which I found on sale because it looks old, is a book that was printed by Rabbi Shalom Messas in 1969 in Casablanca. So this was printed in Casablanca. But if you smell this book, I'll hand it around gently. It smells like an old book, like it has that flavor. And he writes, Rabbi Shalom Messas, that he is a grandson of the great-grandson. So he's a direct descendant of Berdugo. That's why he felt it his obligation to reprint his books. And in fact, as Rabbi Messas does in most of his books, he's very smart. Instead of writing a dedication in every book, he prints the dedication and then just fills in your name. That way he doesn't have to write a dedication. But he does that literally in every single one of the books that he prints. His own books, at least. I don't know about this book. In his own books, that's how he does it. It saves some time. He writes your name and then a signature at the bottom. And it already has a blessing and a message and everything else. If you want to just pass this around gently, this is a commentary in the Parashat Shavua. This time I bought an extra suitcase and brought it back. In fact, my father-in-law even gave me another suitcase. So it costs money, but shipping from Israel has become even more expensive than it ever was. And less reliable. That's true. These are Shelot Utshuvot of his, different commentaries on the Torah. Somebody's outside. Yeah? And this is a commentary of his. Yeah. It's a third volume of a commentary on the Nevi'im and Ketuvim. There's two volumes that come first, also by Rabbi Yonatan Halevy. They're all written by the same author. And this is a Haggadah of Pesach that was written. I want to read you a section from this. I have this Haggadah of Pesach that was also put together by Rabbi Moshe Amma. This book was written by his grandson, of which there are no internet entries on. I did not have a time to set up my to look into my books of encyclopedias of Chachamim. Rabbi Yaakov Berdugo. You see, Rabbi Shalom Asas makes a place where he can sign your name, and then he writes here, Rabbi Shalom Asas, that since he was very young, he started collecting the writings of Rabbi Berdugo, and he was printing them. And then he started working on this book, which almost didn't exist. There were huge chunks of it missing. And he spent his whole life gathering a letter copy from there. Or if he was quoted in another book, then he took that letter and added it to this book. He said he already reached the year 80, and he's afraid he's going to die before the book gets printed. And then nobody will know him for sure. So he said he has to print this book right away, and he hopes that people will read it and get involved. So the special thing about it is that the writing in here is very beautiful Hebrew. And so he writes here that he did his part, and he signs his name, Hamishtadel, the one who did hard. He did his effort to get this book printed. Why did I want to read this to you? Because Rabbi Rafael Berdugo has a piece. I was looking at the beginning of the Haggadah. He wrote it for you, Rabbanit. He talks about the fact that we open up the Haggadah. Kol dichvin, yetev yechol. All who are hungry, come and eat. And this invitation is part of understanding that poor people are embarrassed to come to your house and eat, especially when you call them poor. And especially when they're poor and they come to your house and it's full of food and nice things and nice sofas. And part of the Haggadah is intended to make the poor person feel like tonight we're all the same. Tonight we were also poor once upon a time. That we used to be in Egypt slaves. And to make the person feel good, this is very important to know. There's a 2-volume book that I have never had the room in my suitcase to carry back. Every volume is probably, I'm mamash not exaggerating right now, 2 volumes that are this thick each one. It's called Takanot Chachmei Miknes. I have Takanot Chachmei Fez, but it's all the rules, the extra halachic rules that the rabbis of Miknes made. And I always say that it's good that Ashkenazim never read this book because they would consider us reform for sure. And I'm saying reform is not a bad thing, but for them it is, and therefore they would say, how can you change halakha like that? He made certain, famously, the rabbis of Morocco reformed the laws of inheritance so that girls could inherit their fathers. Also, we have read certain things like that. But an example that I'm thinking of now, a lot of his takanot were social takanot. He saw that people were borrowing money to make weddings. They were borrowing money to make britot. They were borrowing money and they were getting in debt. And there were all kinds of minhagim that started being born. That when someone has a family event, then you have to make them dinner or send them 24 eggs. And he said, what's happening? Okay, bro? The books. Don't smell the books. What ends up happening, said Rabbi Berdugo, is that people feel a lot of pressure whenever there's a simcha. Imagine there's 3 bar mitzvahs today, or 3. You don't have 24 eggs times 3 to send. You got to start borrowing eggs, buying. He said, listen, at a certain point, we have to stop this game. And he started making takanot. No longer will the meals be worth more than this amount of money. You cannot give gifts more than this amount of money. And he made rules. And when Chacham Berdugo made rules, that was in fact, one of it, yeah. We should take this with us to the East Coast. And one of the takanot, his son or his grandson wrote in one of his teshuvot. He said, "Listen," said, "I can't force you to listen to me." Like the Gemara says, "Zodati." This is my opinion, but I can't say kibluha. I can't force you to accept it. But this is not my opinion. This is the opinion of my grandfather, and my grandfather's opinion in Morocco, I can force people to keep, because that's how much of a strength he had there. The only chacham that I know who had that kind of influence, unchallenged, unquestioned, was in Algeria. There was a chacham, I didn't bring his book today, I didn't buy any of his books this time, was the Matei Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda. It's right on the tip of my tongue. My mind is so. I'm gonna walk out of here and I'm gonna kick myself. Is it Matei Yehuda, the famous Rabbi Yehuda? I was gonna say his name and I'm gonna hit myself that I didn't remember it. He was in. No. Those are Moroccan names. So don't guess Morocco. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't matter. He made rules. For example, he standardized the ketubot in Algeria. After him, you could not write your own ketubah. You follow one kind of ketubah, one type of get, one type of shechita, one rule of kashrut on Pesach. What he said, that was the law. Ayash. Rabbi Ayash. Thank you. Ah, very good. Rabbi Ayash. No, that's Arush. A different. Havdil. Here you have the last teaching I can read to you from Rabbi Berdugo. V'lachen, and therefore, ye'ot la'adam. It's fitting for a person. Oh no, sorry, he starts like this. Od remez b'ma'amar hashta hache l'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. So why does the Haggadah say we're here today, but next year we'll be in Jerusalem? Tochachat megula lanu b'nei hagalut hashevuim b'chutz la'aretz. It's a musar, open musar to those of us who are still captives of chutz la'aretz. V'lo natan libenu lalechet la'artzenu v'nachlat avotenu l'chek imenu. That we have refused to go back to Israel, to the arms of our mother. Kizot michlal advarim ma'akavim et ha'geula. Because this is one of the things that holds back the Mashiach. The Jews live outside of Israel. כי כאשר רוצים להשתקע בחוץ לארץ ולשבת בישיבה של קבע, כן ימדדו לנו ומניחים אותנו באשר חפצנו. If we tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu, listen, we want to build our house here, want to buy our cars here, want to raise our children here, He lets us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu lets you make bad choices. And so the more we show we want to live here, the more HaKadosh Baruch Hu lets us live here. And then he says, ולכן, and therefore, יאות לאדם שלא ייתן בדיבו שישתקע בחוץ לארץ. It's fitting for a person to always remind himself in his heart, I live here, but I don't want to get stuck here. I don't want to be permanent here. Livnot batim va'aliyot meruvachim. I don't want big houses with attics and patios. I don't need it. Ki kol ze yoreh yeush milechet la'aretz. Because all of this shows that we have given up hope to ever go back to Israel. The more we are permanent here, the less chances there are for us to go home. V'zeh shamar ha'magid hashta hacha. That means we are now here. We are saying in the Haggadah, you see me tonight by the Seder, I'm happy and I'm very calm and everything is good. So don't think that I'm happy because I'm happy being in America, I'm happy being stuck here in a land that is not the Holy Land. I'm only happy because I'm saying that even though I'm here, next year I'm going to be in Israel. He says he doesn't talk here that we're going to be free in Israel. That's not the point of going back to Israel. It's time for us to go, even if it's not free, to go live in Eretz Yisrael. He said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to tell him, we did our part. Everything that we are living here is temporary. Look, everything we do is temporary. Now you do your job. Make sure that even though we are here this year, now it's your job to make sure that we are in Eretz Yisrael next year. That's my blessing for all of us. I hope that as we spend, and I still have books that I didn't get to, but as we spend the next year of learning Torah together, and the next season of Pesach, we should spend our time learning about more Chachamim, expanding our horizons even greater.